Well, it's been a busy couple of days and a very busy weekend in Victoria with those by-elections in 2 seats. We'll get through it all now. National Editor of The Australian, Dennis Shanahan, joins me. And Sky News contributor Chris Ullman as well. Gents, welcome. Let's start with question time if I can. High drama today. The Coalition tried to shut down a response from the Attorney-General Mark Dreyfus, in which he went on to accuse the Coalition of politicising anti-Semitism. Here's a little of how it played out.
But those opposite have taken every opportunity since the 7th of October 2023 to politicise the trauma and the experiences of the Jewish people. You're disgusting.
There's nothing more serious than the opposition being accused of politicising an issue like this.
I tell you what, there was an audacious move today from Labor, Chris, because they are the ones, I think, universally, if you speak to the Jewish community, who are regarded as having not done enough at home. And the voting record in the United Nations makes it clear that they are the ones that have junked 7 decades of bipartisanship.
Yeah, Peter, I think we've discussed this before. One of the things that we have seen with the Labor Party is it's moved a very long way from its position on Israel over time. It used to celebrate the fact that it was Doc Evatt who really pushed the United Nations to get the state of Israel up. Australia was one of the first nations on earth to vote for the state of Israel in the United Nations. And for a very long time, the Labor Party's position on Israel was a very strong one. I don't think that any of us can say that that hasn't shifted over time. It's shifted quite dramatically in my lifetime. I think you'd find that a majority of people really now in Labor's caucus are pro-Palestine, and certainly its membership is very much that way. So Labor finds itself really stuck between its base, the Greens, and its old position, and it's shifted quite a long way. And the Coalition has actually taken advantage of that. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I think the breaking of the two-party position on the state of Israel has been something that is really deeply disappointing for Australia, certainly for the state of Israel. And it's been very disturbing for Australia.
Let's go down to Victoria if I can, Dennis. Those by-elections on the weekend, state by-elections, seats of Werribee and Prahran. Prahran was not contested by Labor, so that was a seat was predominantly Liberal vote and Green vote. Werribee, though, you know, multi-players there, including a community independent. I know all the lines, you know, probably wrote them in my time as well. Oh, it's a state issue, it's a state by-election, there's no federal implications. But there wasn't a big state issue on the table. There wasn't big local issues. This, in my view, was a hit squarely on brand Labor. And given the PM and the Premier are in the same hard left faction, come on, there's got to be lessons here for everyone, doesn't there?
Oh, certainly. And I think that I certainly remember the Penrith by-election in June 2010, and so does Kevin Rudd. That was a state Labor by-election. It was in the Penrith seat, a stronghold, never been lost by Labor. It was lost after a swing of almost 30%. And as a result, a direct result, Kevin Rudd lost the Prime Ministership. The Labor Party was thrown into disarray for the next 4 years, and that all came as the trigger from a state by-election. So state by-elections can have horrendous impacts on federal government. There's no doubt about that. I think that the problem, as you say, is one of a Labor brand issue. There was no standout state issue in the Werribee by-election. I think that they're looking at problems with Labor, state and federal. And one thing which I find actually even more interesting than the huge swing in the suburbs against Labor. I mean, obviously, if this is replicated at a federal election, and the election's got to be called within 10 weeks. And so there is not a great deal of room for improvement for federal Labor. But I think that the Prahran result is also interesting because it demonstrates that once again, the Greens are losing out to, in this case, the Liberals, but it was partly because an independent Labor candidate preferenced the Liberals. This is what we may see in the federal election, and we could see in Brisbane, Ryan and Griffith going one to Labor, one to the Liberals, or whatever. Whatever it is, it's a problem for the Greens.
Doesn't that expose, Dennis, that the PM has an opportunity? If he thinks that the Greens are a cancer on our democracy, He can preference away from the Greens. He can put them last on Labor's how to vote. It would basically wipe them out. I mean, the only reason the Greens survive is this interdependency they have with Labor on preferences. If he breaks that nexus, I think the Greens are in real trouble, certainly in the lower house. So the fact that he doesn't do anything about them, well, he's whistling Dixies, and if he says they're a problem.
Well, precisely, but Labor can't afford just to across the board say we're going to put the Greens last. We know that Labor depends on more seats from the Green preferences than the Greens rely on for Labor preferences. So it is very much in Labor's advantage to keep that going. Of course, what we may see are some individual decisions, as we saw in Paran, where an independent Labor Party member runs and draws votes which then go to the Liberal Party. It could work the same in Western Sydney, where Islamic parties run and the Liberals run as an independent or further down the ticket. There's a very complicated deals to be done here, and the major parties really need to look at the outcome of keeping the Greens under control.
It's parasitic, that's what I'll call it, Dennis. I'll leave it there. Let's go to you, Chris, because we've got about $500,000 spent in recent weeks on online ads disparaging Peter Dutton. There's a fair bit out on YouTube. Have a look at this one.
These are all cost of living measures introduced by the federal Labor government. But look who was opposed to every single one of them. Whichever way you look at it, you'll be worse off under Dutton.
Chris, we saw in the US election, the Democrats were running Trump ads, the Republicans were running Trump ads. It was all about Trump. The personal attacks were already, I think, factored in by voters. I'd have to say I reckon the same thing here. I mean, everyone's ACTU, the Greens, Labor, even the Libs are all running Dutton ads, but he's been in the public eye for 20 years. I think people's views on him, you correct me if I'm wrong, they're pretty much factored in, and Australians don't like the personal attack.
Well, Peter, it tells you one thing. It tells you that he's the thing that's on the Labor Party's mind at the moment. So the Labor Party is obviously scared about Peter Dutton as an opponent. He clearly is the one that they have to take out in order to make sure that they secure this election. But one of the things I've got to say, and you've seen it over time, is that this constant refrain you essentially get from Labor about Liberal Party leaders that they're unelectable. Remember John Howard back in 1987, the Bulletin's front page, which said, Mr. 18%, why does this man bother? Well, it took him a lot longer, but John Howard eventually gets there. You'll remember very vividly that the Labor Party said that Tony Abbott was unelectable. It turns out that he was quite electable in the end. People don't have to like you. They have to respect you and think that you are able to do a job. And I think the problem with the coalition the Labor Party has at the moment is that people don't believe that they're capable of doing the job and they're looking for an alternative. Now, the problem that the coalition has got is that if you look at what happened in the by-election on the weekend, the Labor Party lost 17% of its primary vote in Victoria, but the Liberal Party only picked up 3.6% of that. Now it's spraying all over the board. The coalition is in a position to make a big shift in this election. It's got a long way to go. Now, don't forget that the winning number is 76. The Labor Party is currently on 78 seats, and the Liberals and the Nationals are on 58. That is a very big bridge to gap. Now, it's possible they can make very big inroads, but they have to get their own act together. Yet we've seen Victorians now have picked up their game a bit, but around Australia, I'd say to you, one of the really big issues for the coalition has been their internals are hopeless, and they have been hopeless in offering people an alternative. Now, if they can offer an alternative and stay well focused throughout the course of this campaign, we could see an historic event, but we're still a long way from it.
Yeah, look, I'd still say it's possible, not yet probable, for a Dutton majority, but I'd rather be him where the momentum's headed than the other bloke. Just quickly, big job here for Kevin Rudd. I mean, Joe Hockey, Dennis Shanahan was able to talk President Trump around in Australia's interest the last time he put tariffs on the table. It's all about Kevin now. Do you think he can do it?
Well, I think that the Prime Minister said he has a scheduled conversation with President Trump by tomorrow afternoon, our time, and that will be about tariffs. It'll be a big test for Anthony Albanese and for Kevin Rudd as ambassador. What we have seen is President Trump putting huge demands out there. He has then forced world leaders to come to him, and we've seen sometimes that's ended very ugly. We've seen Justin Trudeau basically finished by his inability to deal or confront Donald Trump. Now, we know Anthony Albanese has a track record of making extremely embarrassing comments about President Trump when he felt that President Trump was never going to be re-elected. I mean, saying that he frightens the shit out of him. For goodness sake, this is the Prime Minister. And yet he now has to get on the phone, go cap in hand and say, as happened last time with Donald Trump, when he threatened to put steel tariffs on Australian steel, he has to now convince him, as Joe Hockey and Malcolm Turnbull did last time, to drop those, that we are a friend, we are an ally, we have a trade surplus with the US. But of course, being an ally didn't help Canada, and being an ally may not help Australia, even with the AUKUS agreement. So I think this is a huge test, a few weeks out from the election, for the Prime Minister to be able to say he can deal with someone who scares the shit out of him. He can do it in the interest of Australia. And personally, I hope he succeeds, because if he doesn't, we are going to be in a lot of trouble with our steel and aluminium industry. Aluminium industry is already expecting a hit. So this is
Already
a real
on its knees.
problem, not to mention the cost of energy for aluminium and steel. So I think this is a huge test for the Prime Minister, and it's not going to be easy, given the background going in to talk to who is a vainglorious President of the United States.